right. Good evening and welcome to the 2024 Police Civilian Internal Affairs Review Commission Annual Summit. My name is Erin Hayes and I am the current chair of the commission. I'd like to recognize the other members of the commission in attendance tonight: Vice Chair Sarah Florman, Commissioner Nancy Rodenberg, Commissioner Chevelle Webb, Commissioner Lara Forstrom. Unable to attend with us tonight are Commissioners Nicole Schellender and Commissioner Deborah Arimer-Makhor. Also, I'd like to welcome city officials in attendance: Chief Axel Henry, Commander Amanda Hugh, Commander Jake Peterson, Commander John Kajacob, Director Brooke Blakey, Deputy Director Beth Commerce, and Coordinator Sierra Cumberland. I'd also like to offer my sincere gratitude to the people in the audience and to those viewing the summit via live stream. The involvement of community members is crucial to the success of a commission like the PCIARC. And finally, I'd like to thank the members of the St. Paul Police Department for their hard and honorable work. It's National Police Week, and I would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity to thank the officers who spend their days and nights working in our community. I am pleased to report that we've seen improvement since our last summit. New state legislation has increased the transparency of our review process. In response, the commissioners have proposed changes to our operating procedures currently under review by city staff that will allow, when Chief Henry departs from one of the commission's recommendations, that every member of the commission gets to see the reasoning behind those departures. Previously, this information was shared only with the PCIARC chair, who was prohibited from sharing it. That the entire commission will now be privy to the chief's thoughts represents a huge step forward, and I'm grateful to our state delegation for prioritizing this important change. Still, there remains a lot of work to be done, and so, as in past years, I'm going to make some suggestions. I ask that they be taken in the spirit in which they're offered. After all, the point of this commission is to help the St. Paul Police Department serve the community with purpose. I have paraphrased the poet Juvenal before. It is our job to watch the watchers. That is, what our commission offers the department are outside eyes and objective discussions about circumstances that, by their very nature, can be difficult for those close to them to consider judiciously. First, the stipend commissioners receive remains laughably small. I do not say this because I want or expect to be enriched by my volunteer efforts. I think it's safe to say that none of the commissioners do. But it is a fact that $50 a month is simply nowhere near sufficient compensation for the work being asked of community members. Commissioners can put in 20 hours per month into this work. To ask someone making, say, $15 an hour to sacrifice half a week's wages is simply untenable. Offering such a meager stipend pretty much guarantees that only relatively privileged members of our community can be commissioners. To me, this seems both vicious and perverse. Don't we want people from a broad spectrum of our community to share their observations and insights? I ask once more that the stipend be raised to a more reasonable sum. And moreover, I ask that this discussion be decoupled from any general discussion of increasing stipends for all city commissions. What gets asked of commissioners on the PCIARC is quite different than what gets asked of members of other city commissions. And I fear that a blind insistence on talking about them as if they are the same is tantamount to taking no action at all. Worse, it's preserving a systemic roadblock to participation. But another larger issue looms over the review process, and that is the general difficulty in ensuring community voices are truly heard regarding discipline recommendations. For those who don't know, our process works like this. When the PCIARC receives a complaint, we commissioners review the documentary evidence, including body cam footage, and then meet to discuss the case. After a thorough airing of the facts, we vote on what sort of discipline we think is most appropriate and then report our findings to the chief, who considers our recommendations and then issues his own final decision. A disagreement with PCIARC's recommendation is called a departure, and here's what's significant. It is almost always the case that the chief and the commission are in alignment as to whether an officer has behaved inappropriately. It is, however, extremely common for the chief to say that a particular officer's action merits discipline, just not as much discipline as the commission deems appropriate. The discrepancy is usually due to two factors. First, the commission does not have access to an officer's complete discipline record, and so our recommendations are for the most part based solely on the incident under review. I'd like to ask for the city and department's assistance in giving commissioners more information about officers' discipline records so that we have the necessary context for making recommendations. The second common point of disagreement is whether a recommended discipline will survive a grievance process. And this is where the influence of the St. Paul Police Federation and its advocacy and officer discipline process begins to encroach on the work of the commission. And it is where our community's ability to have input on our policing practices is diminished. The most frustrating aspect is that no one knows about this. It happens behind the scenes, cloaked in statutory secrecy. No complainant ever knows the reasoning behind the disposition or discipline recommendations for their case. And this is a problem because it gives our most vulnerable community members the impression that the PCIARC, the St. Paul Police Department, and the city itself are all arrayed against them. Transparency breeds trust. People are more willing to accept results when they are fully explained to them. I therefore ask that not only the final disposition of our cases, but the commission recommendations, along with the chief's reasons for departing from these recommendations, if there are any, become matters of public record. I'd like to conclude by thanking my fellow commissioners for their dedication and hard work. Ours is a draining task. We spend hours every month seeing community members on their worst days interacting with sworn officers on their worst days. It takes a lot out of each of us, and I know this, but it's essential, this grueling, grinding work of ours. We help keep the system honest. So thank you all once again. I hope you all enjoy the summit. I'd like to now introduce Director Brooke Blakey of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and DJ Brooks who is the Executive Director of World Youth Connect. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Good evening and welcome again to the annual PCIARC Summit. My name is Brooke Blakey. I'm the Director for the Office of Neighborhood Safety, and I have the pleasure of presenting this evening with a dear friend of mine, the Executive Director, DJ Brooks of World Youth Connect. We had the opportunity this year to take some time and really work with with World Youth Connect, our Office of Neighborhood Safety, as well as the Harvard Kennedy Government Performance Lab.
This one?
You got this one.
All right, so World Youth Connect is a youth-led nonprofit based out of St. Paul. We started off on the east side of St. Paul, working with youth ages 12 to 25 to organize whatever. Talking about things from policing our own communities to
just youth mental health. How young people want to be treated more human in different spaces, and we started doing workforce development. So from there, we actually built out our organization pretty large now. We have about 70 young people in the city of St. Paul, anywhere from youth on probation to youth actually going to go study abroad in Italy with the U of M, working together. So this project was amazing for our young people. We got training and partnership, not only from the Office of Neighborhood Safety, but from Harvard itself. So they send a couple.
So you asked, why are we here presenting? Well, we had an opportunity. The Office of Neighborhood Safety was formed as a result of a 45-member commission roughly 2 years ago. And with that, we got to hear a lot from our adult folks about what is safety, what does safety look like. But in our work that we started, we learned that we had not had a youth voice very, very loudly heard. And so we worked with World Youth Connect to really talk about what are community-based indicators.
So, co-designing this process was easier for young people. Being very ambitious, they came up with ideas and ways to advertise this work, how to attract people into the work, how we wanted to voice our opinion. So anywhere from language of questions to length of interview, they got to decide. Another thing that they did was identify key points in the communities to make this process as diverse as possible. As you know, St. Paul is very, very diverse. So making sure that we really did push and get the voices heard of people from here about the safety here.
So what we did is we came up with the community-based indicators pilot. And really what that was a research project that was funded by the Office of Neighborhood Safety, using interviews and focus groups with young people to really develop and figure out what are our new ways to measure safety. This was co-designed with youth from World Youth Connect, and really figuring out what it is and how we wanted to know how those things work. And so they were trained as co-researchers. They led the recruitment and community engagement piece. They supported all of the interview facilitation, and then they identified the supports of what the interview participants need. And so what was really great about that was the opportunity that we knew that we were talking about very sensitive subjects with young people, and we felt it very important to make sure that afterwards they had access to any type of mental health supports that they needed to discuss all of the things that we talked in case they were triggered with those things. And so I think that was one of the most valuable pieces of the work.
Yeah, really just letting them know that they have support from the community was a big one. There's a fear of badges in government industries and people when it comes to young people within the community. I just turned 25, so I aged out of being a youth a little bit. But while working on this project, I was 24. So I got to not only work as a young person on this project with young people, but really dive in deeper about how they felt. I got to do a lot more wraparound services about incidents with youth and police or youth on the train, or just talking them through that process. And we did pay all our participants too, which was nice.
Money is a motivator, isn't it?
It's a motivator, yeah.
Right. So with that, who participated in this research, DJ?
So youth ages 13 through 25 who lived in St. Paul for more than 3 years.
Why did we choose them? Because they had
been impacted by violence, so we asked 4 key questions. They only had to say yes or no to these 4 questions, only one of them. So were they impacted by violence in the last 2 years? Do they have a family member who was impacted by violence? Have they been incarcerated due to violence? Or have they had a friend or relative perish? We actually ended up with over 80 responses and people interested, and we had to do a filtration process just because of time.
All right, and the participants that participated in this came from what?
So as you can see behind me, the east side, of course, was a third of our participants. We had a lot of participation from the east side. We actually had to go back to get a little bit more diversity in the beginning, making sure that we represented not only those different ethnicities and races and genders, but really pushing to make sure that we did get the Frogtown Rondo area, the downtown area, west side, and other. The other area is pretty special because some youth don't know what side of the city they stay on. We did look at city lines. We did try to explain what's the difference between, Frogtown and downtown and the east side and where those borders are for young people. They let us know that we were wrong sometimes. So we worked hard. Age demographic, like I said, was 13 through 24, but most of these interviews did come from young black men ages 18 to 24 coming from the east side of St. Paul.
And one of the other unique things is, as part of the recruitment strategy, we were able to really rely on some of our other community-based organizations. So JK Movement, Ujamaa Place, Esperanza United, and Safe Zone also provided us with individuals and recruitment strategies to make sure that we were reaching all of the various populations throughout the city.
Opened those doors for us for sure, and we got to work with a lot of their participants too. If you know JK Movement, Esperanza United, they have youth there. So our goal was not to just bring youth into those spaces, but meet them where they were at while we were doing this process.
And so what safety topics did we hear from youth when we did this?
So we talked about, and these came from those indicators. So these are the trends of what we talked about a lot of times. We had open conversations. So it started off with normally a general question of how's your day? Just getting to know the young person, asking them where they're from, how old are they, what school they go to, do they like it? Before we got into the real sensitive topics or talking about trauma. Once we got into trauma, one of the biggest things that came from this report were a lot of young people are on guard immediately. They see people that don't look like them, they see a large group of people, they see a handful of indicators, whether it be a broken window, somebody who looks like they may be intoxicated or off drugs, and they instantly get on guard. They're back against the wall and they don't feel safe.
Yep, the second thing that they talk about was feeling unsafe on the train. Why were they talking about feeling unsafe on the train?
So the train, as we know, is one of the main sources of trouble sometimes, especially the middle car. It's called the party car for our young people. So they identified that the train was one of the places that they were on guard the most. Even on the platforms or on their way to the train, they identified that they did not feel safe a lot of times and were exposed to a lot of things that they didn't necessarily want to see, or smell or hear. So the train came up multiple times throughout these interviews, even for people who didn't get on the train. They utilized stories and information from other young people to determine that it was not a safe space. So.
And then we discussed multiple perspectives on police, and what did we hear in that arena?
Fortunately, there were good and bad. There was not a whole lot of bad when it came to police, honestly. A lot of people, they want the power to go up to somebody else without having a badge on and really just correcting them, letting them know that they shouldn't smoke in front of a kid or they should turn the music down without feeling like they had to call the police. A lot of times we heard that more and more throughout the interviews. There were some perspectives from young people. When I say a small percentage, maybe 5, maybe 10% said that they feared the police in some aspect due to an incident where they just didn't really understand what was going on, or they felt like the officer didn't understand. It was always a miscommunication, or just they were having a bad day. Ran into an officer at the wrong time. It's just like running into anybody else. So.
And then the last thing that I had immediately asked for when we were talking about youth is social media and safety. And what was one of the big things that they came out of the social media piece? A
handful of young people avoid social media, which was surprising to us because as a young person, I am highly involved in social media. So young people utilize social media as a source of news a lot of times, right? And what they're seeing on social media either discouraged them or intimidated them to the point that they didn't want to participate in community events. You talk about rondo days or parades and things that we actually canceled as a city due to safety. They saw a lot more of suicides, a lot more death, a lot more things that really brought them down on social media, so it affected their mental health, which didn't allow them to be social. We talk about COVID, social media was the only place we could be social as young people a lot of times. So it got brought up, and then on the safety aspect, a lot of people thought it was a tool that young people use to actually set up fights or, post their guns and intimidate other people. We learned that young people don't want to do that. That wasn't the goal. That wasn't one of the things that they wanted to publish. And they also did talk about being viewed a lot of times. So how social media is used as a government tool to be watched. So it did put them on guard. It did make them not want to be on social media more, which was upsetting to hear sometimes. Some of the stories were really
difficult to hear.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So with that, what did we learn from youth about signs they feel safe? And so when we asked youth if your neighborhood was safer, what would you do? We organized that into these shared topics and indicators and into 2 categories, which ended up being safety in one's neighborhood, hence the Office of Neighborhood Safety, right? And safety on the train. So working with our compadres and colleagues over at Metro Transit, which World Youth Connect does some additional work with them. We figured out what did they say in the neighborhood, what would make them feel safe.
Yeah, so these indicators are things that they actually want to see. And it's important I say that before I go down this list. So when they see people playing outside, and this is one of the things as a young person you think is normal. I know I grew up at the park. I actually used to live right above this library. So I went to the park over there. I went to school up the street. So seeing people play freely outside, whether you're young or old, just swinging on the swing set without fear of getting shot was one of the things that they said. They're listening for a lot of these indicators. So a lot of sounds, a lot of sirens, a lot of people, they listen for it. But when they hear people playing at the park, it was one of those things that brought joy to them. Also, moving freely without worry. So me as a young person, being able to literally just walk out that door and somebody say hi to me was a really big thing for a lot of other young people. And we got to dive deeper into that conversation with young people who said they simply want to be treated as human a lot of times. You know, they don't want to be seen as a problem. They don't want to be seen as somebody who could potentially become a problem. They want to be just seen as the person that they are. Socializing with others. Like I said, just simply saying hi, asking somebody how their day are without feeling like you're being attacked. You know, being open to those conversations, attending social gatherings. They want more. They want more social gatherings as young people. They want to see people coming together and smiling and having fun and eating food. And they also want to put them together. I learned as an organizer, young people have some crazy ideas. Like as an alternative to stealing cars, they said we should put a go-kart course and teach young people how to drive or bumper cars so then they could crash into each other instead of crashing into the train line. It's a thing. So, and then going outside at night, they want to see the city light up. Like they want to see more lights within the city at nighttime, especially in the alleys. You talk about those back roads that are seen unsafe as young people, and this was more towards that 16 to 24 demographic that was like, hey, I'm outside after 10 o'clock. I get off work, and a lot of times I don't want to go anywhere else. We even had a comment about taking their garbage out. Like they'll wait to take their garbage out until the morning, making them late for school or work or whatever they were headed to do because of the fear of literally going outside at night. I wasn't personally one of those young people with that fear.
No.
At all.
At all.
At all. I'm carefree. But yeah, just looking at that, going outside at night is one of the little things that we think as people, we overlook it a lot of times. Like I don't personally think about the time of day sometimes when I go out. Like I need some air, so I'll just step outside. And we take that for granted as community members a lot of times because there are people with real stigmas and traumas that don't allow them to leave their house once the sun sets.
And then we talked about safety on the train. We've already kind of alluded to that. And so you asked, what are we doing with this work, right? So we have these indicators and what are the next steps? And so really what we're doing as part of the next steps are continuing to work with World Youth Connect, our community-based partners, and really developing with our Parks and Rec as well as libraries, events, issues, availability for young folks to engage in some of these things, and continue to do more and additional research to make sure that we're doing different policy making things. And so one of the other things that the youth also were super interested in is bringing back night moves with our law enforcement community being there. That was one of the big requests that we had heard from that. So I think also just being a part of the process and being a part of the policy. So as we sit here and we talk about commissions and things like that, we do have the Neighborhood Safety Community Commission, and we do have young folks that sit on our commission as well, and wanting to make sure that we are changing policies within the city. And so we wanted to come and share our community-based indicators with community in this process. I want to thank DJ for being a lead in that and handing over the reins now as he's aged out of being a young person. He is still the ex officio executive director, but continues to do that work, and it's definitely a product of what we do, and we continue to engage with youth, and when they stumble, we pick them back up, and we continue to do this most important work. And so we thank you for giving you the time and energy to come and talk about our community-based indicators work. And I will turn it over to. Yes.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Director Blakey and DJ. What a cool and unique study. I think there's a lot of power in having research done and getting that data related to things that a lot of us in the community hear on a pretty frequent basis. So thank you for sharing. My name's Sierra Cumberland. I'm the coordinator of the PCIARC, and I'm real grateful for you all coming out and sharing space with us this evening. I'm going to be reviewing some data from the 2023 PCIARC Annual Report. For those who are interested, we do have some physical copies in the back that you can grab on your way out, and the annual report has been posted on our website as well. So before we dig into the data, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the PCIARC process. Something I'd like to note is that the PCIARC process is independent from criminal proceedings and civil litigation. It is the internal affairs review process with the PCIARC. So folks who have had an experience with St. Paul Police or a St. Paul Police officer that don't meet the expectations set for our department can file a complaint. And they can file a complaint with us in the Human Rights Office or with the St. Paul Police Department. Complaints can be filed using our online form. They can be filed in person at either office, or via mail or email attachment. I want to note for everybody that accommodations and language assistance are available upon request. I view a key part of my role as to reduce barriers to this process and ensure that folks can come and file complaints in a way that is comfortable for them. After a complaint comes in, it is investigated by the Internal Affairs Unit. And under state law, to be considered a formal complaint of police misconduct and have the potential to undergo the PCIARC process, there needs to be an incident statement and a signature to constitute a formal complaint. All right, so I'm not going to dig too deep into this. I'm going to allow our panelists to dig into some of the details, but Internal Affairs conducts that investigation, and they put together a really tremendous packet of information. And 2 weeks before each PCIARC meeting, the commissioners receive access to this investigation. It'll include the original complaint, statements from witnesses, statements from officers, as well as recordings. This can include body-worn camera footage, in-car camera, dash cam, whatever evidence the Internal Affairs Unit is able to compile. The PCIARC holds a deliberation, and then they make recommendations to Chief Henry on what the outcome of that complaint should be. As was mentioned earlier, if discipline is imposed, an officer may file an appeal, and that would go through the grievance process. And then once the complaint is closed fully, then the complainant receives a letter to notify them of the final outcome and if discipline was implemented. All right, so now let's dig into the data. In 2023, the PCIARC reviewed 34 cases. Those 34 cases involved 66 officers, as a single case could involve one individual officer, or it could involve a dozen officers who responded to a call for service. And the same is true with those 88 allegations, where a case could have one or multiple allegations, and we count those total allegations per officer in those complaints. That pie chart there shows that improper procedure was the most common allegation in those complaints reviewed by the PCIARC. On our complaint form, which we updated in 2023 thanks to our partners in SPPD, that was a collaborative effort. As part of the complaint form, we do collect demographics. And so these are the demographics of complaints that were submitted directly to the Department of Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity. Folks don't have to provide these demographics. They're totally an optional section of the complaint form, but they do help us to identify who is filing complaints, who is not filing complaints, and help us to identify which areas of the community we want to especially target outreach and engagement in the coming year. Last year, for the first time, we included in our annual report this set of data: total complaints received by the Internal Affairs Unit. Now, these numbers do include complaints that were filed with the Human Rights Department, as well as those that were filed directly with the Police Department. So there was 91 complaints, 44 were submitted to the PCIARC, and you may be remembering that, hey, the PCIARC reviewed 34 cases. And that discrepancy is because some of those complaints filed in 23 were reviewed by the PCIARC in 2024. That second table below outlines the reasons that some complaints were not submitted to the PCIARC. This data is provided by the Internal Affairs Unit each month and is presented at the PCIARC meetings, and it is also available aggregated in our annual report. So, as I mentioned, the PCIARC gets together, they hold this discussion, and then they recommend a disposition to Chief Henry on what the outcome of that complaint should be. So on the left are the definitions of all those different dispositions that are available to the PCIARC. In 2023, the most common disposition, most frequently recommended disposition, was that of sustained. And if a complaint is sustained, then the PCIARC also issues a disciplinary recommendation to Chief Henry along with that case, along with that disposition. And so the disciplinary recommendations are listed in order there, from least severe at the top to most severe at the bottom. And to note that retraining is also a recommendation that the PCIARC can issue, but it's not a standalone recommendation. Retraining has to be accompanied by one of these other disciplinary recommendations. And in 2023, the PCIARC recommended retraining 10 times. Here's a look at the breakdown of those disciplinary actions recommended by the PCIARC. The most frequently recommended was the oral reprimand. And as Chair Hayes alluded to earlier, when the Chief of Police disagrees or opts to implement a disposition or a discipline other than that which is recommended by the PCIARC, the Chief will write a letter that goes to me and to the Chair, and that allows the Chair and the Chief to have a conversation about the case, and we also aggregate that data. So in 2023, the Chief of Police departed 8 times from a disposition that was recommended by the PCIARC and 7 times from disciplinary actions. And one of those departures was what we refer to as an upward departure, where more discipline was implemented than what the PCIARC recommended. All right, folks, so this is my contact information up here. Please check out our website and feel free to reach out anytime. I would now like to welcome up Chief of Police Axel Henry, who became Chief in November of 2022. Chief Henry.
Well, thank you so much. I actually feel more comfortable when I walk around, but the camera guys will get angry at me. As was stated, my name is Axel Henry. I'm the Chief of Police for the St. Paul Police Department. I know that we're kind of running a little bit behind time, and typically I want to make sure that we get a lot of questions, but the panel's going to allow for that. So I'm going to steal my time to just talk about a couple of quick things. There were some discussions earlier on about some of the statutory changes that have occurred in our state, and I'm going to plug this in the sense of what it's like to go to the moon or climb Mount Everest or doing those things. Many times in our world, people will say you can't do that. It's something that's impossible, or it can't be done, or it's too dangerous. And then someone does it, and guess what happens? A bunch of more people do it. If you were to look at the new statutory language that came out, that's for the state. That means anywhere in the state of Minnesota under our laws. And you were to drop that down next to what our old situation used to be here with our ordinances and our guidance for how we run the PCIARC here. They look very similar. They're clearly related to one another. So one is an evolution of the other. And I say that because the state never makes a decision like that unless someone starts to do something. And what they've told the rest of the state is, and there are other places in our state that are saying, you can't run a civilian commission like that, it doesn't work, it won't be successful. And guess what the retort for that is? Well, they do it in St. Paul. And so I would implore the folks, particularly the ones that are watching at home, one of the things as the chief of police I get asked a lot is, what can I do to help? How can I volunteer? How can I show up and do other things? And to be clear, the chief of police has nothing to do with the compensation piece, so don't. I heard that up front. But I'd like to offer some optimism there. There is a really important thing that you can do. If you want to understand law enforcement better, and I will tell you that my experience has been that no one learns more about what we do here in St. Paul and likes us less. So there's two really important things you can do to help learn more about the police department. One is to do a ride-along. I would implore you to do ride-alongs. Come out and do them. Secondly, come to our Civilian Police Academy. Super important. Now the good news is if you really want to show up in a formal way and volunteer and help the city is, join the PCIARC or apply to be a member of the PCIARC. And by the way, those first two things I mentioned are part of what you have to do to be on the PCIARC. So it actually works out very well for us. But if you really want to give back, don't limit yourself because you think you live in the wrong neighborhood or you're the wrong height or the wrong, whatever. That doesn't matter. We want people from all over our city being involved, and we will gladly set our, I think they will, I don't want to speak for them, but have a line waiting if we need to get folks on. It's a very important civic duty. It's a very important city duty. We rely on our process to work the way it is, to have that involvement. So that's why I wanted to spend my time talking about today is it's super important to what we do here in our city, and it's a function that really, I don't think enough people really understand and know about, and it gives you the opportunity to be on the vanguard of change, to be a real trailblazer on how things are done. You literally are changing the way the state operates, changing the way the rules are around these kinds of things by the behavior in the city of St. Paul. So please, please, please consider volunteering and showing up in that way. That's all really I have, and I think I'm supposed to now invite the panel up, and I think I put us right back on time. So, do you have a preference where we sit?
Wherever you're comfortable, Chief Henry.
Come on up, commissioners. Far be it from me to tell you.
Is he? Do I have to be in the middle? Sit on the edge. Oh, you can't sit on the edge. No. Okay. I remember last year.
Right. Welcome, panel.
Some action. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Gotta stay refreshed.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Right. Excellent. So in a moment, we will open it up to questions from the audience. But it's my hope we could start the panel with a discussion on what types of things do y'all take into consideration, keep in mind when you are making recommendations or issuing decisions related to these PCIARC cases. I'll ask my panelists to please speak closely into the microphone to ensure the folks at home can hear clearly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, to start with, I start with the videos first, because that way you get a visual when you're reading. And I just look at, that way when you read and you see what the actual complaint is, then you have a visual. And so I look at the tone of things. Did the police officer de-escalate, or was he a source of escalating the situation? Was there something there was nothing he could do, and it was so out of control, all he could do was maybe arrest, or, there was no way to calm the person down. And, and just try to be fair. You know, it's not easy being a police officer. I couldn't do the job. And you have to look at it from, if I was in this situation, how would I feel? Or the civilians person, are they being heard? Is the police officer taking them serious, their complaint, or things like that, so.
I'm Nancy Rodenberg, and I've been out here 2 years, so I have another year in my 3-year term, and hopefully will renew. But I've tried to look at the facts on paper first, and then the facts on the video first, and I keep trying which way is right, first or second. But in both cases, I look at the different ways of describing a situation. I look at the communication between the officer and the person who's having, is under consideration for being arrested or disruptive. And I try to figure out how has that communication gone? What could that person, the officer, have done differently, if anything? Was my understanding of the procedure followed? In our meetings, we often ask the officers, what is the procedure in this case? What are the officers supposed to be doing? So we question that and think about if that was followed. And then I try to come up with a holistically based decision on all those kind of facts.
And I'd like to, my apologies, Vice Chair Foreman, something to add? I was simply going to ask if Chief Henry wouldn't mind weighing in on what kinds of things does he keep in mind when making decisions about these cases reviewed by the PCIARC?
Absolutely. So when I get it back from the PCIARC, it's typically accompanied with a decision. So one of the things I always look at is I have to remember that as the Chief of Police for the police department, which really represents 25% of all the city employees in St. Paul, I'm the only person that gets to issue discipline. So I need to make sure first and foremost that it's, obviously at this point it's in a complete investigation, that I pull emotion out of it. I look at it very fair and objectively to make sure that it's something consistent with whatever the discipline's going to be is going to be consistent with what we would do with any other person, any other officer. I make sure that whatever we do is also going to be corrective. And there's sometimes going to be situations where we say that just simply isn't going to be the case. To correct this problem, we're going to have to get rid of the employee. But I also have to look at the redemptive quality. I would never allow our officers to go out and hold it against someone if they dealt with someone on a call that maybe they'd been arrested 20 times and they've been to prison. They don't get to treat that person poorly. Also, our officers, I'm looking for a redemptive path for them. How is the way we correct the behavior and make you a successful, productive police officer going forward? And so that's always in the back of my mind as to how do we get you on a path that you will stay on and be successful. So it's a fair and, balanced thing. I don't let, there are things I see sometimes that emotionally impact me. I will see them and think, they tick me off or they upset me in certain kind of ways. But I have to make sure that I'm not making decisions based on an emotional thing. I'm making them on the set facts, figuring out what is the best answer for the city and for that individual employee to make sure that that we don't repeat the behavior and that we get successful behavior in the future.
Continue on. So when there is a scenario when the commission makes a recommendation and there's a departure of that, the chief writes his reasoning in the departure letter for why he is choosing to depart from the commission's recommendation. The commission also writes our recommendations, and Coordinator Cumberland sends those along, and I get the opportunity to talk with the chief and really advocate for the commission's point of view. So the process in a departure is I'll listen to the entire deliberation again. I'll look back on my notes, make sure that I'm recollecting the case as written, and then I advocate for the position of the commission, even if I, in that particular instance, did not vote for that disposition. Because I think it's important as a commission that when there is a vote taken and when there's a recommendation put forth, that there's someone advocating for that. And we've had some really good conversations that I think sometimes have resulted in looking at policies in a different way or starting to plant seeds to recognize that maybe this policy that was crafted 10 years ago just doesn't apply to the community that's living in our city now. And let's take a look at how we change it and how we can take these standalone incidents and turn those into something that is helpful to the entire community. So I've appreciated those conversations with you.
As have I. Going to be another plug if you're interested in joining the PCIARC. You get actually influence these things, so it is a real service with purpose.
What, the question is, what are the requirements to join? Do you want to answer, Coordinator Cumberland, or do you want me to?
Please go right ahead, Chair Hayes.
All right, you must live in the city of St. Paul, any ward. There's an application process. There is a requirement to go through the Civilian Police Academy before you are able to be placed on as a voting member. There is also a background check. The information that we get access to is criminal justice information, and so there are certain disqualifiers from that, and I apologize, I'm still not super clear on what a disqualifier would be in someone's record. You also get fingerprinted, and there's an interview, and then you go through a mayoral appointment. So ultimately, the mayor is the one to select and appoint commissioners with city council approval. It's a 3-year term, so it's quite a commitment, but I will say it's the hardest but most rewarding volunteer work I have ever done, and I don't think I've ever regretted spending a minute on this work.
Right. Yes. And the question for the recording is, do you have an upper age limit?
I believe there's an 18, you must be 18, but. So as long as you're 18.
And as you can see, we need males on the board as well.
Does anyone else have any questions?
When you deliberate, like how close are your votes? Are you pretty similar or dissimilar?
Yeah, and the question for the recording is, how similar or dissimilar are the votes? How common is a unanimous recommendation from the PCIARC?
There are definitely situations where we are all in alignment. We had the same impression, we saw the same thing, we read the policy and interpreted it the same way. But I would say that it's much more common that there is some disagreement and divergence with both disposition and discipline recommendations. So we are not frequently unanimous, I would say. So we have a majority vote, and that majority is what the decision then becomes that then Chair Hayes speaks with the chief about. And I think one of the best things about the process is that we're not encouraged to have a unanimous vote. We aren't in a position where we feel pressured to agree with each other or to be persuaded. We're all, given the opportunity to say why we think what we think, to make our case, to, show our kind of thought process. We've all had our minds changed by each other who have seen things that we missed or interpreted things differently, but we have all also been the only vote in one direction and everybody else is on the other side of that. That really does happen, and it's fine, and it's really, I think, one of the best parts of the process is that it feels okay to be that kind of outlier.
Thank you. Well, so we've talked a bit about the case deliberation process. Another important piece of the work done by the PCIARC is policy recommendations. Would you all mind talking a little bit about what that looks like, both from the commissioner's side in issuing those recommendations, as well as Chief Henry, what it's like to perhaps implement some of those suggestions?
Well, I can start with just a real life example. Just a little bit history about myself. I was involved with what we refer to as our Blueprint for Safety domestic violence training in 2008. I was one of the people that taught the entire department. And one of the things that we had started to notice, and we were hearing both internally on police reports, but also from our advocacy, was that we were feeling like we were losing a little ground in that area. And so very quickly after I became the chief, I had proposed to the Major Crimes Division that I wanted to see us do a kind of a 2.0 refresher department-wide. Well, literally simultaneous as that was happening, the PCIARC reported to us that they were starting to see an uptick in complaints in particularly female victims of domestic violence crimes, and that some of these things weren't being taken. So it married up, you know, good news, bad news. Good news is everyone's seeing the same evidence. Bad news is we're seeing the evidence, because it wasn't us being at our top game. And those types of conversations help us, because it gives us the ability to see where things are falling off the rails, and the service to the victim, we don't want that to suffer, so if we can prove that, that's good. We prefer to have less complaints against our officers, and we don't want anybody feeling so frustrated that they have to go make a complaint in the first place. So it's very refreshing when we realize that all of our points of contact, in this case, our supervisors and the investigators were seeing it, our domestic violence advocates were seeing it, and PCIARC were seeing it at the same time, and I think it's a wonderful representation of how all of those different points of light, because if you think about it, at any given time, maybe investigations doesn't notice it anymore, and then it's one voice. No, you got two that are noticing, or maybe some other group doesn't see it, and it's always nice to have that spotlight on there, so we're checking to see, is there patterns, are there trends, are there things we can be doing better? Our position in St. Paul is that police reform is a banner flag that should fly over our police department every day of the year. We look at everything we do and say, could we have done it better? And that, the PCIARC helps us with that.
And I'll also add on that in that scenario, what was, I think, really great was that the commissioners themselves recognized the trend and the pattern, right? We see anywhere from 4 to 6 individual cases per month, and it can be hard if you're just looking at aggregated data to really pull those trends out. But because we've been partnering as a commission for, I mean, I think the shortest term right now, someone has been on for just over a year, or a year and a half.
Year and a half.
And so we've been able to kind of develop that knowledge of, gosh, we're seeing a rise in areas that we didn't see before, and we're able to articulate in an aggregated way, right? We don't go back and say, well, remember this case of so-and-so. It's, we're seeing a trend of this type of case. And so it was a way to use that knowledge that we've built up to echo or amplify some concerns that we've been seeing in the community. And we know domestic calls are some of the most dangerous for both the community member and the officers. So as a, you know, as a community and as partners, we need to get this right. This response needs to be better. And I think the department's taken some good steps towards that.
I think one of is that the police department will come in and share with us what training looks like for officers. So they will come in and they will talk about, here's our policy, here is how we train this, you know, here's how frequently folks get trained on this. And they, without exception, have been really open to feedback, open to questions. I ask a ton of questions. And it really feels like an open process where, you know, if we're noticing things, there's really a desire to hear those patterns and to correct them, and for us to be as informed as possible when we're looking at these cases as to how training occurs and what really the goals are of each officer in those situations.
Could I add that every meeting, or almost every one, we have training. So we have presenters who come in on various topics, for example, on the domestic abuse response from community support people every time. We've had so many interesting topics. So I feel like it's a continuing ed to be on here, and I feel like it's really a privilege to learn all these different areas.
And I'll also add, we definitely appreciated when the department was getting ready to deploy drones as a tool to use. They came before the PCIARC to share, here's what our proposed policy looks like. What do you think? Before we implement it, we want to get multiple community points of engagement. And I think that really helps shape policy that works for the community. So thank you.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of what our basically our approach has always been, is that we're not the police department, we're your police department. So that's your drone program. So we should be, you know, having different people look at it. We had community meetings all over the city, and the PCIARC's a very formal part of our process that's there. It's a connected relationship that we plug into all the time to make sure we're asking those questions and getting that feedback.
And
get another plug for it.
The training portions occur in our public portion of our meetings. So the first Wednesday of every month at 6 o'clock. You can come join us either in person or it is live streamed. We've got a really fancy new camera for live streaming, so it should project pretty well. So we encourage you to join us during those meetings or even revisit past videos that are posted on the PCIARC website. The first Wednesday of every month at 6 o'clock. We rotate around the city, so we try to get to every ward every year. The schedule is posted on the PCIARC website.
In the same vein of looking at the domestic abuse calls, in training, do you also do training on mental illness and substance abuse co-occurring disorders?
The question is, do you also do training on mental health and substance abuse co-occurrences? Thank you.
We have a pretty robust list of trainings that we've requested. Commander Peterson has taken that list and run with it. I believe that it is a topic, but I think there's about 30 topics on that list. So we try to get to one, I think, every month, but I don't know if we have anything specific planned for mental health or under the influence, but I think it's a good thing to add to our training list if we don't have the topic already.
It's definitely, mental health in particular is a topic that comes up at least once every month in terms of what is the best way to handle mental health situations out in the community, and find that boundary between keeping the community safe and keeping that individual safe, and also respecting their right to exist in the world. And so, yeah, it's a constant conversation. I think we would love to have, a lot more learning.
And provide additional resources to people for mental health issues that a police officer may or may not be equipped to handle when they address a call, so.
I have a question. It's not a mental health or just a physical health situation. I've contacted the police department, House and Rec, Forestry, and Recreation. There's a hornet's nest on the boulevard on the street, and I would like it down. Look,
Understandably.
It's true.
if it falls,
Yeah.
you're not going to be affected. But I would like the one that's down, but after a month of calling these people, it's still hanging dangling in the tree. So who do I contact? Commissioners?
And the question is regarding a hornet's nest that is on a boulevard. None of us like a hornet. Nobody wants to see that nest in their yard. Do we have any recommendations?
St. Paul Public Works.
I think he's getting a phone number right now, but if you give me the
Yes.
address, I'll text the person personally right now. You can tell me what the address is.
Dep-
The address?
Yep.
757 Fuller. 757 Fuller.
Oh, boy.
757 Fuller is where the hornet's nest is?
Oh, boy. The millions of people watching are now going to avoid the hornet's nest.
Yeah, so this is some live time problem solving. That is one thing we are absolutely here to do. Thank you, Deputy Director Beth Commerce. She is she's one you want on your side when something needs to get done. So thank you. You bet. You bet. Please.
Add something to this, which is the police department gets a lot of calls that aren't really their bailiwick, I guess. And I've seen the officers try to solve them, and I'm wondering, this is not a real police job, but they're doing it and trying to take care of. So I've been pretty impressed with the huge array of problems that come to the police that aren't really police problems.
So Nancy, police says protect and serve. So those hornets.
That's true. It was okay to call the police about the hornets. They'd probably direct you somewhere.
Yeah. Sounds like that hornet problem is well on its way to being resolved. I'm glad to hear it. We do have another question from Director Brooks.
I was just wondering, what's one thing you guys would, or something that community members could do more of to help you guys' mission? I know a lot of times we put a lot of weight on y'all's shoulders. I might go help with the hornet's nest. But like, what's one thing you guys would like to see from community members when it comes to the work you guys do?
what's something from community that would help to support the mission of the PCIARC?
Join the PCIARC.
I would say this. In 1973, my brother-in-law was killed by a Minneapolis police officer, and it impacted the family pretty hard. My sister was 8 months pregnant with his child, so she never got to see her father. And so I had a very low opinion of police officers for a long time, and so I was very reluctant to join when I was asked because of the time commitment. And but then I thought, well, I can punish some police officers, but but that's not. But being on this panel and the time that I've committed, I've learned to respect them. Their job is super hard. There's no way I could be an officer, I know right now, without laying hands on somebody. But it's like they are patient. Most of them are patient, respectful. I have seen the change over the years that I've been on here, where they're really trying to serve their community. And every police officer is not a bad cop, so to speak. They're really trying, from what I see. And I don't know if it's because of the body-worn camera, but there is a lot of suffering in our community, real suffering. There's mental illness, homelessness. People can't get a decent wage, and they have to work 3 jobs just to pay rent. And so there's a lot of frustration right now out in our community, and I see the impacts, and my view of a police officer has totally changed from that. And what I would like to see on our board, more people of color. You know, my perspective, I've had instances where I saw it from a whole different perspective, and, you know, I was maybe outvoted, but, you know, as a black woman with black sons, black, you know, partner, you know, you see life differently sometimes. And I think George Floyd opened up a whole new way of how police are viewed. But I will say that they are trying, the cameras footage, they're really trying to de-escalate and serve our community. So if you're interested, please join. You know, you're a male, you're, okay.
I work a lot. I shout out Rose.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I have a full-time job. I'm on several boards. I'm on committees at my church. I have a disabled son I have to commit a Tuesday to and a Sunday. And, you know, I am very, very busy. So, and I'm old, you're not. So, yeah, I know you're 25, but.
It's gonna happen whether you try or not.
Yeah, so
I think the other thing that community members can do is talk about the fact that we have this oversight process. It is an avenue to share, you know, real concerns with the department. We don't look at increased complaints as necessarily a bad thing. It's that more people are trusting the process and more people know about the process. And to be able to take advantage of things like the trend we saw regarding domestic abuse calls and be able to have that direct line. If we didn't have those complaints come in, that might not have been recognized, and then it would have been just one voice saying, we think something's up. So we would encourage you to share the message that police oversight does exist in the city of St. Paul, has existed since 1993, I think. So we were pioneering in this oversight space. So help spread the word that it is an avenue that's available. It's not punitive. It's not meant to be a gotcha or a punish. It's the approach that this commission really takes is that we want to hear from community members because it keeps the community safer when the department is able to have a third pair of eyes kind of taking a look at what is happening in our community.
And I want to add also to, don't feel like you can't submit a complaint because it's not egregious, it's not huge. If there was a minor situation that felt wrong to you, I think, you know, one of the things that we see is that over time, things that aren't checked escalate. And so when we're seeing smaller things, we can jump in and prevent bigger problems in the future. So, you know, I'm not saying write a complaint about everything, but I think that sometimes people are like, well, what happened to me, you know, was really upsetting to me, but what happened to my neighbor was so much worse, so mine isn't that big of a deal. And I want people to realize that all of the interactions that our law enforcement have with the community are important.
Thank you. We had a hand raised in the back.
Could I just jump in real quick? I feel like it's important.
By all means.
If the gentleman in the back who asked the question, just a Hornet update. I've already been in contact with both Public Works Director and the Parks and Rec Director. Their forestry team's looking at, the one question they had was, is it a boulevard tree? I assume that it is. And so they're looking into right now who's going to deal with that problem, but we have movement, so good news on the Hornet.
Round of applause for solutions in action. All right. See, these are things you can accomplish by coming to PCIARC meetings. Exactly. All right. We had a question in the back. Yes, please.
So I've got four questions.
Okay.
And so, and they're not in order. How do the commissioners, assess itself?
How does the commission assess itself? That's question one.
That you meet your goals. Right? That's question number one. Number two, I think you would be sort of pioneering that this what the work. It's that pioneering from what year?
From the 1990s.
Okay, so then my next question is then, were you folks looking at other models across the country and did this? And if so, I want to know what other part of the country. And then, now that we're at 2024, what other parts of the country might be looking at the model you folks now are presented with? That's my second question.
And the question is second question is regarding other models of civilian oversight and if those are being taken into consideration and which areas of the country may and other areas of civilian oversight are being considered, referring to the fact that the commission was referred to as pioneering previously.
Right, so if you, I'm just interested in the past
Mm-hmm.
and the future.
Sure.
And
Okay, go ahead.
the third question is, who decides what topics? Because I think you folks said, somebody said we have about 30 topics you're looking at, and I was surprised when you said that one topic.
Would it be okay if we address the first two questions before moving to the other two? Because I want to make sure I give them the right amount of space. Would that be okay?
Can I finish just stating the third question?
Sure.
So the third question is, who decides the topics that go before you guys?
You mean training? Training.
And the final question being regarding which training topics are presented to the PCIARC commissioners?
Somebody had said that there are 30 topics that they do.
All right.
Regarding
Yes.
the comment on the 30 topics that are before the PCIARC. Thank you.
So let me take the first part of your questions, which was about the way that the PCIARC was formed. So this was back in the 1990s, and it was really pioneering for its day. It was one of the first police oversight models established. In 2000, Mayor Carter, correct me if I'm wrong, 2016 or 17, there was there was a study completed on how oversight was working in the city of St. Paul that was done by the University of Minnesota, and there were recommendations made which included moving the PCIARC from the police department to the human rights department, and then also removing police officers as voting members from the PCIARC. And that was a very major overhaul. When that work was done, and I was not involved in that work in 2016, 2017. It was done with a coalition of community members and recommendations from that study. Now, there have been some smaller changes that have occurred throughout the last several years, but the city has not overhauled the method or the model of oversight. As commissioners, we're all members of NACOL, which is the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. It's a very long name for an organization, and that organization is a coalition of communities that have oversight in their cities, and there's many different models. I think there are actually 3 to 4 main types of oversight. Ours is an advisory, so the way that the City of St. Paul has established its oversight commission is that we advise the chief of police ultimately, it is the chief of police's discretion on what discipline and disposition. Now, a lot of that is also governed at the state level. So in terms of the other oversight models that are available, some of them would require state statutes to be implemented. So if we wanted to become an independent organization that conducted our own investigation where the chief recommended to us and we had the final, that would require major changes at the state legislature level. So in terms of what we have in the city of St. Paul, this is where we are. We would love to continue to explore different ways to better meet the needs of the community. This is an evolving, and I think the pace of evolution has only increased since George Floyd was murdered. Does anybody?
I'll just also add, in response to how do we kind of police ourselves, I think we have bylaws and we have a city ordinance, and we make sure that we are adhering to those. We review it as Coordinator Cumberland. Wow. I almost called her a commissioner, was saying we've actually made some suggestions for changes. So that is, we do look at that. We look at, again, we have a lot of conversations about recruitment of PCIARC members and really wanting to gain perspectives. And I think we hold each other and ourselves to a pretty high standard. We really respect the role. We come to the meetings prepared. I don't feel like it would be tolerated for me not to have done all of my review, to not have watched all of the camera footage, to not have read all of the reports, to not come in, having an idea of what I think the disposition should be and having policy to back it. So I think it's something that we take very seriously, and that I think is a culture that we want to continue to build.
I'd like to add, in terms of accountability, all of our conversations are recorded, so that if there is a reason to bring them up in a dispute, everything that we say is recorded.
And then it'll be our final question for the evening regarding those 30 topics that were mentioned earlier. Please tell us a little more.
So those are the topics that we gather as a result of brainstorming during our meetings. Sometimes we'll see a headline or we'll see something happened in another community and we'll want to say, well, what would St. Paul do about this? It's a living, breathing list, and it's generated from commissioners. It's also generated by the department when they say, there's a new policy coming up, we'd like to share it with you. So there's not a checklist. There's not any real scientific method that we gather those topics, but we do really try to make those training topics meaningful. Sometimes we'll look at past cases and say we're starting to see a trend and we want to be able to understand a little bit more.
Sometimes there will be a specific training topic that will require a particular police officer to come in and teach us, and so we might have to wait for a month that they're available to do that. So sometimes it's about scheduling. And sometimes it's about what issues are rising to the surface that are really critical in the moment. We just had a training on all of the new laws that passed in 2023 and what the implementation of those look like in St. Paul, which was a huge lift and really interesting. So things happen that are kind of sort of what's at top of mind, what's most critical in the community if we're raising something that is really serious.
It's important also to remember, like a doctor has a license to practice medicine, an attorney has a license to practice law. In Minnesota, you have to have a license to be a peace officer. So you get a license through the post board, which is the police officer's standards and training. And so it isn't like there's one flashlight looking at things. These are all companion things that there are overlaps to. So for example, many complaints require us to report directly to post, and that's a licensure issue. So while the PCIARC's doing their work, it doesn't diminish that, but they're waiting for that answer to find out where did this land, what happened on this piece, because that is an item that we have to report to post. And like all other things, those lists have grown over time. And so really, I think probably the biggest misnomer that I find myself correcting people on a lot when they ask about this is the PCIARC and this at war with the police department. That's absolutely not the case. It's a companion piece to what we do, and it's a way that we check to make sure everything's working very well, and all of those things work in concert with one another to make sure that we have the most successful department, the most successful individuals, and that we are serving the people in our community in the best possible way.
All right, thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our panel. And Commissioners and Chief Henry are welcome to return to their seats. And Chair Hayes, please come up to introduce our next guest.
Well, I'm not actually sure this man needs any introduction, but would like to welcome St. Paul Mayor Carter to address the summit. Thank you for all of your support of the commission over these years, and looking forward to hearing what you are going to tell us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good evening. 2 hours ago I told somebody good morning, so I'm progressing through my day. It is good to be here. I just want to say a big thank you to all the commissioners who are here. We really appreciate your work day in, day out, month in, month. I know this is an enormous amount of work, and we appreciate that. To our fierce coordinator, we thank you for your work. It really means a lot to us. Where'd you go? Oh, there you are. I'm trying to look at you and tell you. We really appreciate Coordinator Cumberland. We appreciate all the work that you do and the integrity with which you do it. Certainly the leaders from our police department, Director Blakey of our Office of Neighborhood Safety, and our police chief, Todd X. Oh my God. I know your name. Take two. Our police chief, Axel Henry, I appreciate you being here. It's good to see you. And actually, what I was going to say is Chief Henry exemplified to you one of the core kind of value propositions that we try to bring for our administration. Chief or Brooke, can you just help us out real quick? What's the word of the year? Enterprise. Enterprise. And it's a joke because it was the word last year and it's going to be the word next year too. And it's the word that we use for this notion that we can do more working together than we can if we all work separately. And one of my favorite moments of this entire day was when our chief of police, who could very easily say, look, boulevards and hornets nests are not my job, decided that the focus on what one of our residents needed was more important than the strict lines of whose jurisdiction is where. And that to me brings me right to the doorstep of this conversation. We talk a lot in our administration about the difference between city with a capital C and the word city with a lowercase c. See, sometimes when people say city, they mean like the legal entity that I work for, that our paychecks come through, that legal entity of the city government. But most times when people say the city, they're really not talking about the legal entity, they're talking about a community. And we got to figure out how to wrap ourselves around community. And let me tell you, our administration, our cabinet, our mayor's office team, our city staff, all the way through our organizations, do that beautifully every step along the way. One of the most important pieces of that is ensuring that we get public safety right. And I've spent a couple of decades now probably as a critic of what I think of as an archaic model of public safety that only focuses on what happens after something terrible happens. I have children. I know some of you here have children. And if you were to tell me our plan to keep my child safe is to make sure somebody goes to jail after they do something terrible to my child, we'd have to talk a little bit more. That would be really, really, really unsatisfactory to me. And that's the whole point. When I think about keeping someone safe who I love, I don't start thinking about how we get somebody in jail. I start with thinking about how we get guardrails up over the stairs and a car seat properly installed in my vehicle and the little plastic plugs in the outlets. How do we safeguard our community so that terrible things won't happen in the first place? Our police department has to be a critical partner where that's concerned. Our Office of Neighborhood Safety, through our Office of Neighborhood Safety, we're building the capacity and infrastructure to intervene in some of those spaces where we know there's opportunities for better outcomes and to break some of the cycles. But one of the things that I've learned really clearly from the men and women of our police department, many of you know that my father is a retired St. Paul police officer. You may or may not know that he spent, I think, 3 years in the Internal Affairs Division. So I've gotten a chance to see different angles of this conversation. And one of the truisms that dates back to the beginning of a police department in the first place. And I should say a civil police department in the first place. Because while a lot of times we talk about police and firefighters and paramedics and folks like that as sort of paramilitary organizations, I actually see that as a misnomer. The point of a police department isn't to be sort of military light. It's essentially to be the opposite of a military, right? A military exists to protect us from them, whoever we say we are and whoever we say they are. For a civil police department, for the St. Paul Police Department, there is no them. Every person we encounter is us. Every person we encounter is a part of the circle of people who we're responsible for protecting and serving, even when we don't necessarily like maybe their actions right now. And what I was going to say is one truism of the purpose for that, we equip our officers with a lot of things. You can see them right there, belts and radios and badges and handcuffs and everything else. The most important tool, and I imagine every officer, I'm confident every officer here will agree with me. The most important tool that our officers can leave here equipped with is community trust. The absolute most important tool. And I appreciated what you said, Chief Henry, about this being just like you helping with a tree. This isn't about an adversarial relationship at all. This is about partnership. Because trust can't be built in the dark. Trust can't be, and this isn't a police statement, this is any relationship statement. Trust can't be built in the dark. Trust can't be maintained in the dark. Trust requires the light. Trust requires the accountability. Trust requires the transparency to be able to say, we own our actions. We hold ourselves accountable if we think our actions have fallen below our standards, and we pat each other on the back when we believe that our actions have maintained or even exceeded the bar that we set. And let me tell you, nobody sets a higher bar than our St. Paul Police Department. And again, that's not to say we won't have moments where we say, hey, we could have done this better. Hey, we could have held ourselves to a higher standard. But one of the blessings of my life and the opportunity to do this work, I've been asked on national television. And I assume you guys may have heard, I'm somebody who, I say when I think an officer should have done something a little bit different. But I was asked on national television once in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd if I could point to one police department who's on the right road, who's getting the stuff right, who I think the rest of the country should look to as a model to follow on these things. And I told them that's really simple to me. It's the St. Paul Police Department. So we appreciate the work that all of you do. And we appreciate the partner. Yeah, please, give a round of applause, please. So I appreciate the partnership. I appreciate those of you who stand forward to help us every day make sure that we keep those lights on. Our rank and not only is this not an adversarial relationship, but our rank and file officers are the first ones who benefit when we build infrastructure to be stewards, to maintain that level of trust that is absolutely required. I'm really proud of what we're doing. All of the broad public safety infrastructure that we're building in St. Paul through our Community First Public Safety Framework, which essentially combines two meaningful understandings. One, we all say our police officers can't do it by themselves. We've all heard people say that all of our lives, but then we've sort of left the conversation there and left our police officers to do it all by themselves. That's not fair to us, and it's not fair to them. It puts them in a bad situation and creates some of the cycles. So to be able to build the infrastructure that Director Blakey is at work building every day, to show up at a hospital after someone has been a survivor of gun violence, to show up and provide supports for families, to think through how we break some of the cycles that we find ourselves responding to over and over again, I think is absolutely critical. It's an acknowledgement that over half of the time when people call 911, it's not because there's some issue of crime or violence occurring, it's because somebody's concerned about something in community. And that means we have to have that broad team like we're building. And we're getting results in St. Paul. And the rest of the world can see those results. And we get calls from all across the country. And how did you do this? How did you set up your Office of Neighborhood Safety? How did you set up your PCIARC? Why is it that when the whole world turned to that 8 Can't Wait campaign after the murder of George Floyd, the 8 rules around use of force that they wanted every police department in the country to establish, we sat down with a group of activists, and by the time we stood up, we realized that the city of St. Paul, our St. Paul Police Department, has already been doing all 8 of these things for years. And so I'm really proud of that. I'm really thankful for that. We have work to do, and I know I speak on behalf of the chief. You know, when we think about, you know, anybody who's ever achieved greatness in any field, when they say we're good, we can either look at that as an opportunity to sit back and rest, or we can look at that as an opportunity to constantly strive every single day for improvement and for greatness. And that's what I see us doing together. That's what I see us holding each other accountable for. And that's the work that I think absolutely requires an enterprise. So I thank all of you for being a part of that enterprise. I sleep better at night because you are all on this team. And I just have to just say from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of every resident, every business owner, every worker, every young person in this community, thank you all for your commitment to this important work. Thank you very much.
So thank you all for coming out this evening. It is still light out, so it's hard to remember that it's evening. A few of us will probably be around if you have questions that we weren't able to answer. Remember to join the PCIARC. We are looking for new commissioners, and it is a very rewarding, very, very important job that I feel privileged to do. Thank you.